The soldiers opened fire, their weapons cutting through the air with precision. Karnak dodged to the side, moving faster than any human could follow. He lashed out with his own blade, cutting through the guards with brutal efficiency. Each strike was calculated, each movement a perfect blend of speed and power. He was no longer just a resistance leader, he was a weapon, honed by years of survival and driven by a singular purpose to end this nightmare. Nearby, Alara worked frantically at the control panels, disabling one system after another. The sanctuary was a well-oiled machine designed to keep the immortality process running at all costs. But Alara knew its weaknesses. She bypassed firewalls, overrode security protocols, and sabotaged the core's delicate infrastructure. It was falling apart from the inside. Karnak's fight carried him deeper into the heart of the sanctuary, his path littered with the bodies of fallen guards. But then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a member of the Immortal Council. The council member's ageless face was serene, almost peaceful, but his eyes glowed with something darker. This was one of the architects of the human empire's cruelty. They didn't exchange words. There was no time for that. The council member moved with an unnatural speed, his body enhanced by centuries of stolen life force. Karnak barely had time to react as the immortal struck, driving him back with a flurry of precise, deadly blows. Karnak parried and countered, the two warriors locked in a brutal, silent dance of violence. But as they fought, the council member's voice cut through the chaos, calm and insidious. "You think you're liberating them? You think you'll be their savior?" Karnak snarled, his blade slicing through the air in a deadly arc. "I'm ending this." The council member blocked the blow effortlessly, his expression never changing. "You're condemning us all. Without the core, without the energy, we will die. The immortality process has corrupted our bodies. We can't survive without it." The word struck Karnak like a physical blow. He hesitated for the briefest moment, his mind racing. Could it be true? Had the humans, in their pursuit of immortality, turned themselves into prisoners of their own system? Without the siphoned energy, would they simply wither away, unable to sustain their unnatural existence? The council member pressed his advantage, pushing Karnak back. "We were survivors once, just like you. We fought for our place in the galaxy, and this is what we became. Without the energy, we'll die in days. We've gone too far to turn back." Karnak's resolve faltered. He had come here to destroy the humans, to free his people from their tormentors. But now, the reality of what he was about to do sank in. He wouldn't just be ending the Empire. He would be condemning countless humans to death, many of whom had been born into the system, never knowing another way of life. Alara appeared at his side, her face pale, but the stars bore witness to the end of Earth. Warships from the Alien Alliance, fleets brimming with weapons forged in hatred, darkened the skies. Earth's cities crumbled under a storm of plasma, metal, and fire. Skyscrapers collapsed into seas of flame, monuments to human achievement shattered in seconds. The oceans boiled, the forests turned to ash, and the screams of billions were swallowed by the silence of extinction. The Alliance believed they had wiped humanity from existence, just another species swept from the galactic stage. But they were wrong. In the aftermath, beneath the smoldering rubble and the poisoned air, the survivors crawled from the ruins. Broken, starving, and scattered, they were not the victors who had once colonized distant stars, but scavengers in a world that had forgotten hope. It wasn't long before despair gripped them, but humanity had always been resilient, stubborn in the face of annihilation, and it was in that desperate search for survival that they found something dark. Beneath the ruins of a forgotten lab, hidden among the wreckage of old technology, they uncovered an ancient secret, an energy that defied the laws of life and death. It was raw, untapped, and unlike anything humanity had ever seen, but it came with a terrible price. This energy didn't just exist, it fed on something. Not on fuel or matter, but on suffering. The first experiments were horrific. Alien prisoners left over from the war were strapped into machines designed to extract their anguish. The humans discovered that by consuming the torment of sentient beings, they could extend their lives indefinitely. The more agony inflicted, the stronger and more eternal they became. And so, the immortal humans were born. At first, they raided distant planets in secret, capturing small groups of aliens, testing the limits of their newfound power. But as they perfected the process, their raids grew bolder. They no longer cared to hide. Entire civilizations were harvested, their people drained until they were empty husks. Humanity spread across the galaxy once more, but now as predators, fueled by the suffering of others, and among the victims was the Drelak species. Karnak stood on the shattered remains of his homeworld, his eyes tracing the destruction left by the human invaders. The once thriving cities of Drelak were reduced to little more than rubble. The towering crystal spires, symbols of their culture's knowledge and beauty, now lay in ruins, twisted and broken. His people had been taken, his family, friends, all of them ripped from their homes and thrown into the humans' machines, their life essence consumed to prolong the twisted existence of their captors. Karnak's heart was filled with a fire that could only come from loss. His family was gone, their faces now memories too painful to linger on. He had seen the torment inflicted on his people, watched as his mother's screams were harvested, her pain drawn out over days until she was nothing more than a hollow shell. The humans had taken everything from him, and he had sworn to bring them down. For months he had planned his infiltration. The human sanctuaries, hidden in remote corners of the galaxy, were nearly impenetrable. Fortified, guarded, built to withstand any attack. But Karnak didn't care. He had no illusions of survival. This wasn't a mission to live. It was a mission to make them suffer, to make the humans feel even a fraction of what they had inflicted upon his people. He had learned of one such sanctuary, a place where the humans kept alien prisoners in a perpetual state of torment, siphoning their anguish to fuel their immortality. His people were there. He could feel it. Every night he was haunted by their screams, their desperate pleas for release. He would not let their suffering be in vain. The humans thought themselves untouchable, their immortality a shield against the consequences of their cruelty. But Karnak knew their strength was built on the weakest foundation. If they needed pain to survive, then pain would be their undoing. He clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. The time had come to strike, to infiltrate the sanctuary and strike at the heart of their power. He was no longer just a leader of a broken people. He was a weapon. A weapon forged in the fires of revenge, honed by the suffering of his race. And he was ready to wield that weapon. Failure was not an option. The weight of his entire species rested on his shoulders. If he succeeded, he would cripple the human empire, give his people a chance to rise from the ashes of their world. If he failed, the Drelok would be lost forever, their screams echoing in the void, forgotten by the stars. Karnak's resolve hardened. His world had been one of constant fear, every breath a struggle, every day a battle against the chains humanity had placed on them. But fear had no place in his heart anymore. Only vengeance. Only fire. If he had to burn the galaxy to make the humans pay, then so be it. The fate of the Drelok and countless other enslaved races depended on this. Karnak would bring the humans to their knees. He would rip their immortality from their grasp and force them to face the agony they had so callously inflicted. The galaxy would soon know that the Drelok still lived, that they still had the strength to fight, and even if Karnak fell, he would do so knowing that he had taken the first step towards breaking the chains of torment that bound them all. For too long, humanity had thrived by consuming the pain of others. Now, it was their turn to suffer. Karnak had spent months gathering every detail about the human sanctuary. Surveillance drones and encrypted transmissions had provided him a rough layout, enough to know that this was no ordinary facility. It was buried beneath the surface of a barren, inhospitable planet, designed to be hidden from prying eyes. Guarded by layers of security systems, human soldiers, and lethal drones, the sanctuary was a fortress. But Karnak had prepared for this. His plan was simple. Get in, locate the core, and strike at the heart of their immortality. There would be no second chances. He slipped into the compound unnoticed, cloaked in shadows and using every ounce of his training to move through the corridors without a sound. The cold metal halls were devoid of life, save for the steady hum of machines. The air was thick with the stench of antiseptic and something far more sinister. Fear. The kind of fear that lingered long after hope had been extinguished. Karnak's eyes scanned the dimly lit hallways. Security was tight. Infrared beams crisscrossed the walkways. Automated drones patrolled every few minutes. He timed his movements perfectly, slipping past them as if he were a ghost. The further in he went, the more oppressive the air became. He approached the lower levels, where the prisoners were kept. Here, the truth of what humans had become was impossible to ignore. His gaze settled on the grotesque machines lining the walls. Prisoners, mostly aliens of varying species, were strapped to them, their faces twisted in agony. Tubes connected to their bodies siphoned more than just physical energy. They drained emotions, pain, and suffering, converting them into raw power. The machines hummed with an eerie efficiency, every ounce of anguish meticulously extracted and stored to feed the immortals above. Karnak's fists clenched as he moved past, resisting the urge to act too soon. The cries of the prisoners echoed in his ears. Desperate, hollow wails that would haunt him long after this mission. His people had once been proud, vibrant beings. Now they were reduced to nothing more than fuel. He forced himself to push forward, knowing that stopping now would be futile. This was just a symptom of the disease he had come to destroy. As he continued through the lower levels, a figure moved in the shadows. Instinctively, Karnak reached for his weapon, ready to strike. But the figure stepped into the faint light, raising a hand in a gesture of peace. A human woman. Karnak froze, his senses on high alert. She was unarmed, dressed in the standard gray uniform of a sanctuary scientist. "You're not like the others," she said quietly, her voice tense but controlled. Karnak narrowed his eyes, not lowering his guard. "Who are you?" He growled, his grip tightening around his weapon. "Dr. Alara Hawk. I work here, but I'm not your enemy. I know why you're here," she said, taking a cautious step forward, "and I can help you." Karnak's instincts screamed at him to kill her and move on, but something in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't like the others. Her gaze wasn't cold and indifferent. There was something there. Guilt, maybe even sorrow. He didn't trust her, but he couldn't ignore the fact that she hadn't raised an alarm. "Why would a human help me?" he asked, his voice filled with venom. "You feed on our suffering. You're all the same." Alara's face tightened with shame, and for a moment she was silent. Then she spoke again, her words laced with bitterness. "I used to believe in it, the immortality, the power, but I've seen too much." Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to continue. "I didn't realize what it would cost. I didn't know how far we'd fallen until it was too late. Now I try to save those I can, though it's never enough." Karnak studied her carefully, still unsure if this was a trap. But something about the way she spoke, the wariness in her voice, told him she wasn't lying. She had seen the truth of what her people had become, and it had broken her. "You expect me to trust you?" Karnak asked, his tone sharp. "Your kind enslaved my people. Your machines drain their lives away. You've taken everything from us." "I don't expect you to trust me," Alara replied, her voice steady but pained. "But I can give you something you need. Information. The sanctuary has a weakness, a flaw in the system. If you really want to destroy it, you'll need me." For a long moment, Karnak said nothing. His entire life had been built around the idea that humans were the enemy. The thought of working with one felt like a betrayal to his people. But he wasn't here to fight one human. He was here to take down the entire system. And if this woman had the key to doing that, then he would use her, at least for now. "Tell me about this flaw," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. Alara nodded, her face grim. "The immortality process is centralized in the sanctuary's core. It's where the energy is collected and redistributed to the council. If you can disrupt the core, it will sever their access to the energy. They won't be able to maintain their immortality." Karnak processed her words, considering the implications. If what she said was true, then destroying the core could be the strike he needed to weaken the humans' empire. But it wouldn't be easy. The core would be heavily guarded, and he couldn't do it alone. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, still suspicious. Alara hesitated for a moment, then answered, "Because I can't stand by and watch this anymore. We weren't meant to live like this, fueled by the suffering of others. I don't know if it's possible to undo what's been done, but I have to try. Maybe if we destroy this sanctuary, we can start something bigger. A rebellion, maybe, across the galaxy." Karnak was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. A rebellion. The thought had crossed his mind, but he had never dared hope for something so grand. Could it be possible? Could the fall of one sanctuary inspire other races to rise up, to fight back against the humans? It was a risk, but it was one worth taking. "Fine," he said at last. "But if you betray me, I'll kill you myself." Alara met his gaze, unflinching. "I wouldn't expect anything less." With a brief nod, Karnak turned away, motioning for her to follow. Together they moved deeper into the sanctuary, their shared goal now clear. Destroy the core, disrupt the flow of torment, and give the galaxy a chance to fight back. Time was running out, but for the first time in years, Karnak felt the faint stirrings of hope. If they succeeded, they could strike a blow that would ripple across the stars. In the heart of the sanctuary, deep within its heavily fortified chambers, the Immortal Council convened. They were the rulers of the new human empire, presiding over the galaxy with the cold detachment of gods. Each member, having lived centuries beyond the normal span of life, bore the marks of immortality. Their faces were smooth and ageless, but their eyes were hollow, devoid of empathy. These were no longer the humans who had once struggled for survival on a ruined Earth. They had transcended suffering, by inflicting it on others. The chamber was massive, its ceiling arched high above like the inside of a cathedral. The walls shimmered with energy, the very essence of the life they drained from their prisoners. In the center, the council members sat in a circle, their robes flowing like liquid metal. They were discussing their next expansion, another species, another planet to conquer, to enslave, to drain dry. "Reports from the Zalvor sector indicate minimal resistance," one council member said, his voice as emotionless as the machines that sustained their lives. "Their population is ripe for harvesting. We could extract enough energy to fuel the next phase of our development." Another member nodded, her eyes flickering with a faint glow. "The Zalvor are primitive. Their suffering will be efficient. We should begin preparations immediately." The conversation flowed easily, like they were discussing logistics rather than the destruction of entire civilizations. They had long since ceased to see the aliens as anything more than resources, mere components in the machinery of their immortality. There was no room for empathy here. Yet not all of them were entirely blind to what they had become. One council member, a woman whose ageless appearance did little to hide the wariness in her expression, hesitated. "We've been expanding faster than expected. Are we not concerned about overextending our influence?" There are whispers of discontent among some of the older colonies, and resistance groups are growing bolder. Her words hung in the air for a moment, unacknowledged by the others. One of her colleagues finally responded, his tone dismissive. "Resistance is inevitable, but futile. No species can withstand us. They are weak, bound by their mortality. They cannot challenge the eternal." The woman's gaze darkened, and yet, our immortality, it depends on that very weakness. Without their suffering, we are nothing. Have we truly transcended, or have we simply become enslaved by our own hunger? A silence followed her question, but it wasn't a contemplative one. The other council members were indifferent, uninterested in exploring the deeper implications of their existence. They had long abandoned such concerns, too consumed by their endless pursuit of power. In the shadows of the sanctuary, Karnak and Alara crept deeper into the complex. Karnak's keen senses kept them hidden, while Alara's knowledge of the facility's layout allowed them to avoid detection. They moved through corridors lined with advanced technology, the very machines that fueled the immortality process humming ominously around them. As they passed a hidden alcove, Karnak caught sight of the council chamber. Through the crack of a barely opened door, he could see the Immortal Council, their serene expressions betraying none of the horrors they commanded. These were the architects of his people's suffering, the ones responsible for the torment that had devastated entire worlds. His heart burned with hatred. He wanted nothing more than to storm in, to tear them apart with his bare hands. But he couldn't. Not yet. The mission came first. He had to stay focused. Still, something gnawed at him as he watched them. He saw, for the first time, that these humans, these immortals, were not all as unshakable as they seemed. The woman's words lingered in his mind. Are we truly free, or are we enslaved by our own hunger? It unsettled him. Could they really be victims of their own creation? Karnak had always seen humans as monsters, creatures who had forfeited their humanity in exchange for power. But now, as he watched the faint flicker of doubt in their eyes, he wondered if they, too, had lost something along the way. They were not like Alara, who had already admitted her regret, but perhaps they were not as immune to the cost of immortality as they pretended to be. Alara must have sensed his hesitation because she touched his arm lightly, bringing him back to the present. "We're close," she whispered. "The core is just ahead." Karnak shook off his unease, refocusing on the mission. They slipped away from the council chamber and moved toward the core, the central hub of the sanctuary where the life forces of alien prisoners were fed into the immortality machines. The core was unlike anything Karnak had ever seen. A massive, cylindrical structure dominated the room, pulsing with the energy it siphoned from the prisoners below. Tubes connected the core to the deeper levels of the sanctuary, where the alien captives were kept. Their suffering was funneled directly into the machine, converted into pure, raw energy that kept the immortals alive. The room was eerily silent, save for the soft hum of the machinery, efficient, unfeeling, and unstoppable. Alara moved to a control panel, her fingers dancing across the holographic display. "If we can disrupt the flow here, it will sever their connection to the energy. They won't be able to regenerate." Karnak stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the core. This was it, the source of the human's immortality, the heart of the system that had enslaved his people. Destroying it would cripple the sanctuary, perhaps even spark a rebellion across the galaxy. But as he stood there, the weight of what they were about to do settled heavily on him. He thought of the council members sitting in their chamber, unaware that their reign was about to end. He thought of the prisoners below, their pain turned into a lifeline for the immortals above. And he thought of Alara, standing beside him, her eyes filled with regret for what her people had become. The lines between friend and foe had never been more blurred. Karnak had come here to destroy the humans, to exact revenge for what they had done to his people. But now, as he stared at the core, he realized that this was no longer just about vengeance. It was about breaking a cycle of suffering that had ensnared both sides. "Alara," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." She met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I know. But it's the only way." Karnak nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. Karnak's muscles tensed as he moved through the darkened corridors, each step bringing him and Alara closer to their objective. The core loomed ahead, its hum growing louder with every passing second. Alarms had already begun blaring across the sanctuary, a cacophony of shrill sounds that echoed off the cold metal walls. The humans knew something was wrong, but they didn't yet understand the gravity of the situation. Soon, they would. Alara was at his side, frantically typing into a terminal, her fingers moving with expert precision. "I've disabled the external security systems," she said breathlessly. "That should buy us some time." Karnak nodded, his eyes locked on the core. Time is all we need. In a swift motion, he activated a series of charges around the core's main structure. The sabotage was meticulous, each device placed in a way that would disrupt the immortality generators without causing an immediate explosion. They couldn't afford to simply blow the sanctuary up, not yet. First, they had to free the prisoners. Karnak moved with lethal grace, breaking open the cells of the alien captives held in the lower chambers. As the doors slid open, prisoners staggered out, weak and disoriented from the torment they had endured. Karnak helped several of them to their feet, his expression hard but not without compassion. "You're free now. Get out and tell the others what's happened here." Some looked at him with fear, others with disbelief, but slowly they began to move, stumbling toward the exits. The chaos was growing. The sanctuary's once sterile halls were now filled with shouts, alarms, and the sound of heavy boots as human guards rushed in to contain the situation. It wasn't long before the first wave of soldiers arrived. They were armed to the teeth, their faces hidden behind reflective visors, moving with the efficiency of trained killers. Karnak's body coiled with tension as he prepared for the fight. Cripple the sanctuary, perhaps even spark a rebellion across the galaxy. But as he stood there, the weight of what they were about to do settled heavily on him. He thought of the council members, sitting in their chamber, unaware that their reign was about to end. He thought of the prisoners below, their pain turned into a lifeline for the immortals above. And he thought of Alara, standing beside him, her eyes filled with regret for what her people had become. The lines between friend and foe had never been more blurred. Karnak had come here to destroy the humans, to exact revenge for what they had done to his people. But now, as he stared at the core, he realized that this was no longer just about vengeance. It was about breaking a cycle of suffering that had ensnared both sides. "Alara," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." She met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I know, but it's the only way." Karnak nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. Karnak's muscles tensed as he moved through the darkened corridors, each step bringing him and Alara closer to their objective. The core loomed ahead, its hum growing louder with every passing second. Alarms had already begun blaring across the sanctuary, a cacophony of shrill sounds that echoed off the cold metal walls. The humans knew something was wrong, but they didn't yet understand the gravity of the situation. Soon, they would. Alara was at his side, frantically typing into a terminal, her fingers moving with expert precision. "I've disabled the external security systems," she said breathlessly. "That should buy us some time." Karnak nodded, his eyes locked on the core. Time is all we need. In a swift motion, he activated a series of charges around the core's main structure. The sabotage was meticulous, each device placed in a way that would disrupt the immortality generators without causing an immediate explosion. They couldn't afford to simply blow the sanctuary up. Not yet. First, they had to free the prisoners. Karnak moved with lethal grace, breaking open the cells of the alien captives held in the lower chambers. As the doors slid open, prisoners staggered out, weak and disoriented from the torment they had endured. Karnak helped several of them to their feet, and his expression hard, but not without compassion. "You're free now. Get out, and tell the others what's happened here." Some looked at him with fear, others with disbelief, but slowly they began to move, stumbling toward the exits. The chaos was growing. The sanctuary's once sterile halls were now filled with shouts, alarms, and the sound of heavy boots as human guards rushed in to contain the situation. It wasn't long before the first wave of soldiers arrived. They were armed to the teeth, their faces hidden behind reflective visors, moving with the efficiency of trained killers. Karnak's body coiled with tension as he prepared for the fight. LD cripple the sanctuary, perhaps even spark a rebellion across the galaxy. But as he stood there, the weight of what they were about to do settled heavily on him. He thought of the council members, sitting in their chamber, unaware that their reign was about to end. He thought of the prisoners below, their pain turned into a lifeline for the immortals above. And he thought of Alara, standing beside him, her eyes filled with regret for what her people had become. The lines between friend and foe had never been more blurred. Karnak had come here to destroy the humans, to exact revenge for what they had done to his people. But now, as he stared at the core, he realized that this was no longer just about vengeance. It was about breaking a cycle of suffering that had ensnared both sides. "Alara," he said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." She met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I know, but it's the only way." Karnak nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. Karnak's muscles tensed as he moved through the darkened corridors, each step bringing him and Alara closer to their objective. The core loomed ahead, its hum growing louder with every passing second. Alarms had already begun blaring across the sanctuary, a cacophony of shrill sounds that echoed off the cold metal walls. The humans knew something was wrong, but they didn't yet understand the gravity of the situation. Soon they would. Alara was at his side, frantically typing into a terminal, her fingers moving with expert precision. "I've disabled the external security systems," she said breathlessly. "That should buy us some time." Karnak nodded, his eyes locked on the core. Time is all we need. In a swift motion, he activated a series of charges around the core's main structure. The sabotage was meticulous. Each device placed in a way that would disrupt the immortality generators without causing an immediate explosion. They couldn't afford to simply blow the sanctuary up. Not yet. First, they had to free the prisoners. Karnak moved with lethal grace, breaking open the cells of the alien captives held in the lower chambers. As the doors slid open, prisoners staggered out, weak and disoriented from the torment they had endured. Karnak helped several of them to their feet, his expression hard but not without compassion. "You're free now. Get out and tell the others what's happened here." Some looked at him with fear, others with disbelief, but slowly they began to move, stumbling toward the exits. The chaos was growing. The sanctuary's once sterile halls were now filled with shouts, alarms, and the sound of heavy boots as human guards rushed in to contain the situation. It wasn't long before the first wave of soldiers arrived. They were armed to the teeth, their faces hidden behind reflective visors, moving with the efficiency of trained killers. Karnak's body coiled with tension as he prepared for the fight.